Hello friends, and welcome back to the Mothership. Today we're going to be smoking up these no-wrap barbecue beef back ribs on the Weber Kettle. Let's get started. Now what I've got here are 2 racks of beef ribs. They ship these out usually in racks of 2, I've found, at least in my area. So let's get them out of the cryovac and see what we're working with. Now it's in my experience when you're buying beef back ribs, quite often they're not that meaty. They tend to take all of the meat portions for other cuts and just leave these kind of bare bones. These are actually not too bad. Specifically this set right here has actually got some decent meat going on here. You can absolutely remove some of this hard fat if you want. I might just trim off a little bit, like just the stuff that really won't render, and it's where you're actually planning on eating. Now one thing about beef ribs is they do tend to give you these little baby chunks on the side here. Sometimes I just cut them right off, which I think I'm going to do and just cook it separately as a little snack. I'll probably keep this one on there, but these 2 are coming off. Now for the other side. Some people like to take, a membrane off here. You can see this is where it broke the membrane. I don't usually do that. Sometimes I do give it a little scoring, like this. It's not really necessary, I don't think. I don't really care. But unlike pork ribs, if you don't have a membrane on beef ribs, they will just fall apart. So I tend to actually leave everything. So I'm not going to do the other side, but you could just do what I just did, which is a little cross cut. But since we are cooking meat, you guys know the drill. First thing I'm going to do is get some salt on here. These are about 4.5 pounds. Some of that is bone, obviously, maybe about half. My usual is for the meat, I go about half teaspoon per pound, somewhere between half teaspoon to 3/4 teaspoon. So since a lot of this is bone, let's call it even, do 2 teaspoons of salt. I think that should be fine. Now this seems pretty good to me. So all I'm going to do now is get this into the fridge and let it sit until all that salt gets absorbed. Then we'll come back and focus on getting some rub on here. All of our salt has been nicely absorbed. This nice red color come out. At this point, it's time to get the rest of our rub on. I think I'm going to go with my coffee rub today. It's a really, really good rub. It doesn't taste like coffee, surprisingly, but it has a really good savory flavor. And if you plan on putting some sweetness with a wet sauce towards the end of your cook, it really does bring out the flavors and it works really well. I'm going to probably use a sweet barbecue sauce to base these down towards the end, and I think the coffee rub really goes well with that. So you can really go ham with this rub if you're following along because we already salted, which means there's no added salt in the rub, so you can't over salt at this point. What you can do, however, is get as much flavor on here as you want. So we just need to make sure everything gets nice and coated down. Obviously not forgetting the sides. Now you don't really have to do the bone side. I'm probably not even going to bother with it. Everything is not going to adhere to it. It's not going to add any flavor. You're not eating it, so what's the point? But these look pretty good to me. If you follow along with me in my recipe, guys, you should be good to go. Use as much rub as you want. But if you're using a commercial rub and you salted beforehand, you're probably going to have a really salty meat. And that is because a lot of those commercial rubs are basically just a whole bunch of salt. You can't dial in how much salt you want, and you're really just paying for salt, which is why I tend to make my own. But if you do want to use a commercial rub, just make sure that you skip that first step of pre-salting your ribs. Either way, it's time to get the Weber Kettle going. We are going to be smoking on the Weber Kettle with the SNS insert, which could not be easier. I have charcoal filled up almost completely in the basket with just an empty space on the side where I'm going to put my lit charcoals. I've got the water trough filled with hot water. I'm just going to get my fire started, light 2 of these little buggers, and get the charcoal rip roaring hot. These look good to go. Let's get the coals into their spot in the SNS. Now eventually I'm actually going to put wood chunks on here, but I want to get the thing up to its working temperature before I get the meat on or even think about putting some wood on. As far as target temperatures, I'm looking for like 250 to 275 range. Now for vent placement, I usually do the bottom vent about half to a quarter and the top the same. That's usually a good spot. Obviously it'll be dependent on how cold it is in the ambient temperature, how much wind you've got, all that kind of stuff. But for now, let's just let the machine come up to temperature. We have a grill temp of about 250, which means it's time to get these ribs on. As you can see, I started preheating some of my smoking wood on the grill. That's a good trick. Now, as far as placement, I'm going to take the kind of the thicker, bonier side and have that close to the fire. I'm probably going to have to rotate these as they go to make sure that this one doesn't get overly cooked. But I'm going to put that like so. And then get our smaller one behind it, like so. Move my little probes out of the way. And then my little snack, put that over here. And I'm also going to start throwing some wood chunks on. I'm going to get this guy right in the coals like that. And now we just let it do its thing, adding smoke wood occasionally. But the point now is just to let it start to cook, get some smoke. And it'll probably be a couple hours before we have to do anything as far as spritzing. So I'm just going to let it do its thing, occasionally tossing on more chunks of wood. We're about 3 hours into this cook, and these are looking pretty good. The bark is definitely set on them, and there's some pullback coming around. As far as temperatures, the thickest spot here is about 160. I've seen some spots over here about 170. Yeah, it's almost 180. On this side, it's definitely getting a little bit more heat, showing 190. They definitely still need some more time, about 180 back here. But I am going to start blasting them with some spritz. I'm just using hard apple cider here. I'm going to keep throwing wood chunks on, but at this point, they're probably not going to take on as much smoke anymore. So you don't really need to go crazy with wood chunks. You can toss them on. What's important here is we're looking for consistency, really. So what we want these to do is start to bend but not break. And we want a little more pullback. I'm expecting maybe about this much of the bone to be exposed. It's like a ½ inch. But the reality is you're just looking for really probe tender. Connective tissue on these suckers is about 200 degrees when they start to break down. So that's really the point that we're looking for. Let's toss on another wood chunk and let it keep doing its thing. We're approximately 4.5 hours in, and we're probing 180s to 190s. We got some good pullback on here, and this is about the point where I think I'm going to begin basting it in barbecue sauce. Since we didn't add a lot of sweetness, I'm using a nice sweet Kansas City style barbecue rub. You can use whatever you want. This is what I like with this particular recipe. So I'm going to get everything nice and coated down. I'm going to keep doing this about every 20, maybe 30 minutes until they come to the point where they're the pull apart consistency that I'm looking for. Some people like completely fall off. I like a little bit more meat to mine, but you're just looking for good consistency. Temperature wise, you're going to be north of 195, between 195 and 200 probably. Oh, and they look great. Just going to get everything nice and coated down. Get it all covered up. Now, when these are finally done, guys, you don't have to eat them right away. Let's say you're cooking for tonight, and for some reason these cook much faster than you thought. You can absolutely take them. You can put them into a tin foil, little wrap, put it into a nice warm oven, something like that. That'll definitely work for you. I'm probably going to put mine into my toaster oven for a couple hours before we actually eat, because it's kind of early. But I think we still have maybe, I don't know, 45 to an hour at least. These ribs have been resting in a toaster oven at about 140 degrees for almost 2 hours now. Everything is ready to go. We cooked them to about 200 degrees. I started putting on some sauce around 185 to 190, and we started spritzing somewhere around 170. These cooked for maybe about 5 hours total. Temperature was around 250 to 275, and they smell delicious. They look delicious, but let's see what we're working with. Oh boy. As you can see, we got a nice smoke ring on there. They smell delicious. They look delicious. But the proof is in the pudding. Let's see how we did. Now, if you've watched my channel before, guys, you know there's no secret that one of my favorite bites in barbecue is the beef back rib. I used to be able to find them for dirt cheap, and slowly the price is going up on them because I think the secret is starting to get out. I like beef back ribs more than spare ribs. Beef ribs are fantastic. Sometimes there's no meat on them, but what you can get is always delicious. These ones are a little bit beefier, no pun intended, and I'm really excited to eat into these the rest of the night. I just did my standard Supernova coffee rub, and then one of my homemade barbecue sauces. It's a really good, just standard barbecue flavor, and we are going to absolutely enjoy these tonight. The Weber Kettle with the slow and sear makes this cook super easy. You don't have to worry about snake method adding onto it. You just kind of let it go on one side, then start to add coals and go back to the other side, back and forth, pretty much indefinitely. Nice indirect cooking. It's a really, really easy attachment to get into smoking. Now, what I would love to hear from you guys down below, do you wrap your beef back ribs or do you let them run unwrapped? I stopped wrapping a while ago and I've never gone back. It really just gives such a better bark and it's really not that much longer. Now, as far as YouTube guys, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. I have plenty more cooks coming along. And it makes me feel super warm and fuzzy when you guys hit that subscribe button. But most importantly, cook some fantastic. And I will see you guys at the next UFOBBQ. Bye-bye.